My name is Audrey Porter, and I represent EoY, and we are very excited to go through our presentation today regarding end of the year process and gearing up for that. Just a housekeeping item, please put your questions in the chat, and as we go through the presentation, we'll be sure to address any and all questions that you may have. Would you mind going to the next slide? Great, thank you. So as I mentioned, my name is Audrey Porter, and I'm a sales manager here at EoY. And joining me today are my colleagues, Murtuza Bhatia and Rohit Fulsanj, who will be walking us through the presentation. And as you can see, we have a pretty packed agenda today. We'll provide you with a brief overview on who EoY is, as well as an introduction to the process. Then we'll review the challenges and risks, recommendations with an associated timeline. We'll go through processing preparation, setups and configurations, end of the year processing, reconciliation, and then we'll wrap up with frequently asked questions and common issues to be aware of and consider. Great. And then, as promised, this is just a little bit of an overview on who EoY is. As you can see, EoY is a global organization. We do operate in 30 countries today with a very high focus in North America. We actually have over 1,000 Oracle Cloud customers, and we have over 1,500 consultants, full-time employees that work with us. Additionally, we have over 70 Oracle HCM Payroll Cloud customers. We also have a tremendous amount of experience moving on-prem customers to the cloud from platforms such as EBS, PeopleSoft, and SAP. Additionally, we were recognized by Gartner as a niche player in their Magic Quadrant, and we were also named Oracle's Global HCM Partner of the Year for 2019. Next slide, please. And now I will turn it over to the team. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Audrey. Hi, everyone. My name is Murtuza Bhatia. Thank you very much for joining in. And today, as rightly mentioned, we would be discussing and gearing ourselves up for our year-end process. Okay. So a quick introduction of what year-end or end of the year process is and what it refers to when it comes to payroll. Okay. So it is focused to have every rule, every schedule, every employee, and no compromises. Okay, so we have to consider every bit of the payroll process that we have gone through for the entire year, and it all drills down to this year-end process. And that is why the year-end process compromises of various activities which helps the employer to publish the reports, that is the W2 forms, for all the employees working in their organizations. Okay, so now this process, for some of you who already have been doing this for some years, you already know that this is really critical process because the impacts are really huge. One and the most important impact is the deadline. Okay, so here are some of the deadlines. So for the customers who are doing in-house printing of checks, the deadline to distribute the W2 for the employees is usually January 31st. And for the customers who are using third party for their W2 printings, the deadline to provide them the file is around the second week of Jan. And for most of the customers who are actually using ADP as their third party, it is Jan 14th for this year. And this entire process or this entire presentation is to enable you, based on EoY's experience, doing year-end processes, multiple year-end processes for multiple customers every year. Okay, and based on our best practices which is offered by Oracle, some of the best learnings that we have had over these years. We'll share it with you and enable you to have this process very effectively and efficiently done for your organization. Okay. Moving ahead, in the next slide, we're going to see the challenges first. Okay, so with every process, even though if it is a normal payroll run or a normal payroll year-end cycle, there are challenges affiliated to the entire process. Now, I would classify the challenges. These are the challenges. These are the top challenges that we would say that we have faced since so many years. Now there are many other challenges that you might also face. Okay, and as EoY, we have a exhaustive list of all the challenges that we have faced, and we think, but these are the top challenges which we think that should be discussed during this session. Okay, now these challenges are categorized under 4 categories. First, time. Second, balances. Third, the mapping. And fourth, the configuration phase. Okay, so, and as I said, for some of the customers who are already doing this for some years now, you know that this is a time consuming job and it has strict deadlines in it. Okay, the second challenge would be that the elements that has been created are not mapped to correct W2 boxes. Okay. The third is about the balances not initialized correctly at the beginning of the implementation process. For the customers who have gone live in the mid-year or in the mid of the quarter, this is very critical consideration while implementing the year-end process. Okay, because if the balances are not correctly mapped or not correctly initialized, then the final result would not be correct. So this is the most important challenge for some of the customers that we have seen. Last but not the least is the configuration. So with the year-end process, there are certain configurations that has to be done and that has to be validated in the application. This configuration is something that you have to start way early, and we will discuss about the starting and the timeline of it. But this is one of the most important challenge that we have faced across these many years. Okay. And these challenges, as we have talked about, some of these challenges are not application or system related challenges. These are process related challenges. If you are doing a year-end process, yes, it is a time consuming job because there are so many activities involved in it, right? So that's a process related challenge. So just take it as a process and how you want to overcome these challenges as well. Okay. The next that we're going to talk about are the risks. So these are the risks that would actually come up in your way of having a successful year-end process. The first and the most important risk is missing the deadline. Okay, and why it is the most important risk? Because the impact is huge, so which might lead to monetary penalties from the third parties. Okay, so that is what we want you to take into consideration while doing this entire process, and that is what we meant that this is very critical process. The second risk is the W2 boxes amount might be incorrect. Okay, which in a way would take your time, and then it will lead you to miss the deadlines. So ultimately risk number 2 is also leading you to risk number 1. Okay, the third is that the amount, when you do a reconciliation, the amount is not reconciling with your periodic and quarterly text files. Okay, and again, when it is not reconciling, then you would take more time to reconcile and find out what is the difference, and then again it would lead you to miss your deadlines. So ideally, the most important risk is missing the deadline, and the rest of the two risks are eventually leading you to the risk number 1. Okay, so when you are planning this entire activity, we want you to consider this particular thing, this particular point in your mind, and when we are going through this entire presentation, this is what we're going to talk about, how to mitigate this risk. Okay, and that leads us to our next slide on how to mitigate this particular risk. So this slide will let you know what are our recommendations and timeline with respect to planning. Okay, So for recommendation part, there are only 2 points. These are plain and simple. It says plan well in advance and gather proper resources. Now we all know this, right? In the back of our mind, we already know that, okay, we have to plan in advance and we have to gather proper resources, right? I mean, what's new in this? The new or the most important thing are the nitty gritties in these two objects. The first, when we say plan well in advance, there are things for you to plan. First is to divide this entire process into different subtasks and have strict deadlines for your subtask. Okay. Second, consider if today is the date when you're starting, you have around 1.5 months to complete this entire process, and keep this entire deadline in your mind and plan things around this deadline. Last but not the least, if you're not started yet, okay, just keep this in mind that it's never too late if you're not started, and if you've already started, that's really good. So these are the things actually we want you to consider when we say plan well in advance. The second point, which is gather proper resources. Now the resources can be few things. First, have your year-end checklist. Now, we use year-end checklist that we have gathered, we have updated, and we keep on updating that checklist every year. Oracle also provides a standard checklist, but we, from EoY, based on our experience, we add few more points to that. We make it more readable to the customers. We have added few more points in detail, and that is what we want you also to have it with you, the year-end checklist. Okay, that's the most important thing. That is your first resource you need to gather. Second is checking the people's availability. Okay, so you need to have proper resources, human resources around you when you actually do this entire process. So plan your human resources as well when you plan this entire activity. Last but not the least, it is the logistics. So we want you to take care of certain logistic activities or objects, such as, so if you're printing it in-house, first thing which comes to my mind is paper stock. So try ordering your paper stocks in advance and all those things. So these are all your resources, and we want you to gather a proper resources with it. Okay. Now, as the slide says, we're going to talk about the timeline as well. Okay, so we want you to consider this timeline for yourself. So the timeline which we're going to show right now, it is a standard timeline, and we want you to consider or tailor make it based on your requirement, based on your pay periods, based on your number of payrolls. Okay, so starting, so this is the first, that is today's date when we are doing EoY webinar. Then the first step basically in this entire process is to have your setup validations and configurations in place. Start working on it right from tomorrow. That is what we would recommend. Okay. Do the mock end of year processes and start reconciliation. Okay, do run Q4 files. You can run Q4 files, or quarter 4 files on your production as well. It doesn't stop you. You don't have to run payroll. You don't have to run any. There are no prerequisites to it. You can start running your mock end of year processes as well. Okay. The third step is last payroll run for the year of 2020. Now this is a variable date. For some of you, this might be end of the month itself for semi-monthly employees, for monthly payrolls, right? For some of you, it can be 12/24. So it may vary. So that is what I meant, that this is not a tailor-made process. This is a standard process based on how different customers would work. Okay, the next step is begin your end of year process. Okay, so 12/31 to 1/5 is when you can start processing end of year on your production environment. Okay, generate the year end file, do the iteration. So there would be multiple iterations before you have your final file ready with you. Okay, as I said, there would be reconciliations, there would be confirmations, there would be fixing that you have to do and rerun the files, and all those things would take some time. So that's where the mock end of year would come into picture and would help you really well. Okay, next is print the W2 and send files to third party if you are doing it through ADP, and start printing the W2s between 110 to 114, because as we have seen, the deadline to have the file reached out to third party is 114 this year, specifically for ADP. So we want you to consider that also in mind when you start printing, and there would be iterations there as well. Okay, so that's where we have a window from 110 to 114. Last, our agenda is to have the W2s emailed to the employees, and the last date to have that is 131. Okay, and at this point, we are here. We are at EoY's webinar. Some of you might have already started it. Okay, some of you might be on mock end of year process. You are already running it on your test environments, right? So if that is the case, really, it's really good. And if not, then as I said, it's never too late. Start today and you will be able to achieve considering this timeline. Okay. Moving ahead. So now we're gonna talk about the entire end of year process. So we have seen what are the challenges, what are the risks, and how you can mitigate with an effective timeline, right? And you can start today, tomorrow, as soon as you can. Now we'll talk about the entire end of year process. What we have done is, for the simplicity, we have divided this entire end of year process into 3 simple steps. First is the pre-processing, that is the processing preparation, that is what we're going to discuss about in this slide. Second would be the processing, the actual end of year processing, and last would be the post process that includes some of the steps such as reconciliations and generating the forms itself. Okay, so these are the 3 steps that would have multiple steps within it, but yeah, for a start, these are the 3 steps which would be really important for you to understand. Okay, so let's talk about processing preparations first. Okay, the first thing which comes to our mind is the configuration or the setups done correctly or not? Okay, so when it comes to setups, there are already setups being done. So we want you to first validate if the setups done are correctly done or not. Okay, so that's the first step. Okay, second is there are certain setups which is specific to end of year. Okay, there are certain configuration which is specific to end of year, and we want you to do that. There are certain setups which is specific to W2 box mappings, and we want you to do that as well. If it is already done, if it is already taken care of, you validate that. So that is what the setups and configuration in this particular slide mean. Okay, and that is the key part. That is the entire base of this process. So when the base is right, you all know that the entire structure around it would anyways be in line. Okay, so that is what makes this entire process concrete. The next is the data validation. Okay, so start validating your data. So the data that you have it on production, and as I said, you can run the Q4 file as many times as you want on production as well, and start validating data. Start the reconciliation from production itself. You can reconcile the Q4 file with your periodic and other quarter files, and that is the one of the important part of the preparations. Okay, and then the next step would be do a mock end of year process on your test environment to avoid any unwanted errors or any unwanted issues on your production environment when you are actually doing your end of year process. So it's a best practice to have a test cloned from your production environment so that you have your recent updates there. But if you don't have it, that's okay. You can run your mock end of year. Mock end of year is just to have you practice what this end of year process is and to avoid if there are any critical errors well in advance. Okay, so this is one of the preparation step. The last is do the reconciliation. So when you do a mock end of year, don't just run the process, do the reconciliation as well, so that you have an entire method of reconciling. And if you have a method of reconciling right up there in your preparation steps, then when you will do it an actual end of year on your production environment, this would be really easy for you to grasp. Okay, so that was all about the processing preparations. The next slide we would be talking about the setups and configuration, which is, as I said, the base of the processing preparations. Okay, so there are the setups and configurations that we're going to talk about today are the high level configurations. Okay, it doesn't give you the exact task names because there are so many. We don't want to get into so much technical details, but this is just to let you know that these are the checklists you should have at the beginning. Okay, the first is the organization level setups. So the federal and state registrations are done correctly or not. Okay, if there is a new state introduced, do you have all the setups related to those state in place? Okay, if your TRUs, your tax reporting units are configured correctly or not. If the employer name and employer address, that is your registered name and registered address, is correct on your setups or not. Okay, these are the some high level checks that you need to have with you when you are actually doing your setups and configuration. The next is about the employee role. So there is a special privilege which is called view US end of year text form. So this text form privilege enables employee to view the year-end forms. If the employee role doesn't have this privilege, employees won't be able to see see the year-end tax forms, even though if it is generated correctly from your processes. Okay, and we have seen with certain customers, to avoid confusion with the employee, they remove this privilege so that the employees don't go to see their year-end forms and don't find anything at the beginning of the project. But then just keep this in mind, enable this or re-enter it if you have removed. Okay. The third is this document delivery preferences. So for the ones who are printing in-house the checks, we want you to see check that the document delivery preference is set to paper. Okay, for the employees. So this is the third. The fourth is about the W2 box mappings. Okay, so just make sure that the balances are fed correctly to the correct W2 boxes, and only then the year-end reporting will be correct. So there are certain setups, there are certain configurations that you have to validate to make sure that the W2 boxes are mapped correctly. Okay. Now, Oracle by itself provides certain boxes mapped based on the classification of the element or the secondary classification of the element. Okay. However, there are certain elements, there are certain configurations, certain boxes that has to be mapped by us, by an implementation partner or by a customer manually. It doesn't come out of the box from Oracle because there are many implications to it. Okay, some of the examples are Maine Public Employees Retirement System contributions, Maryland State Retirement Pickup Amounts, Pennsylvania Employee State and Employment Insurance. So these are some of the elements or some of the taxes that has to be mapped on a correct W2 box, which is box 14. So just take additional care about the box 14 mapping. Okay, so this actually summarizes the high level setups and configuration, which is related to your organizational setups, your employee role related setups, document delivery preferences, balances to be fed correctly to W2 boxes, and special care for the W2 box 14. With that, now we have completed the preparation part. So I would now like to invite Rohit to take it forward from here and let you know about the processing and the post-processing steps.
Thank you, Murtuza. And just as a quick reminder, if you have any questions, please feel free to put those into the chat. Thank you.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Rohit Fulsanj, and thank you, Murtuza, for taking us through the challenges and risks that are involved in the year-end processing, as well as taking us through the processing preparation that one needs to do for successful completion of the year-end processes in the application. Over here, I will be taking you through the end of the year processing steps. So as you can see on the screen, these are the steps that you are going to follow for completing the year-end processes in the application. Now, depending on whether you are filing in-house or whether you are relying on any third party for filing your W-2s or your taxes, the number of steps that are shown on the screen will differ. Okay. We have also seen in one of the preparation slides, that it is always better to be ahead of time, and that is why we advise all the customers to run the quarterly file, the Q4 file, and the W2s before your last payroll is run, so that you get stock of, so that you can take stock of the situation, and you can basically reconcile as you move into the last payroll of the year. So the steps start from basically completing your payroll processing. So you need to ensure that all your payroll processes are complete. Once your payroll processes are complete, you can run a quarterly file, a quarterly Q4 file from the application. Now, if you are subscribed to ADP's W2 as well as taxes, your steps will end right over there, because ADP will take care of the generation of the W2s, as well as filing the taxes can happen directly from the Q4 file itself. If you are filing the taxes in-house and generating the W2s in-house, you need to run certain additional steps, which are running the end of the year archive process, followed by running a W2 register, which will basically give you all your W2 box details along with the amounts. You can also run the W2 employee report, which basically gives you each of the W2s for the employees. You can validate and verify whether the W2s are getting generated properly, if it is populating the right boxes. So there are two modes to this. You can run this first in the draft mode, followed by the final mode. And once you are done with all of this, you can then print these W2 forms on the paper stock that I'm going to talk about in a little while. And we'll also talk about what steps need to be done after the print process is over. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, so for customers who are not subscribed to the ADP's tax processing, or they are not subscribed to the W2 printing, what you need to do is you need to gather your resources, as we saw in one of the earlier slides. You need to make sure that the paper stocks are ordered well in advance. You need to make sure that the printers that will print out these W2 forms on those paper stocks are also aligned, and make sure that you do a sample print of the W2 forms before you actually go into the year-end processing. You can always run a few samples on test environment and try this out. Okay, so Oracle recommends over here two paper stocks that it supports. One is Evergreen and other is RR Donnelly. So make sure that these paper stocks are ordered well in advance. The printer and everything else is already tested out, because of the alignment issues that may occur. So make sure that everything is there. There is one more thing. So if the W2 are generated, let's say, and if you want to make some updates to some of the employees' balances, so in this particular case, you need to run a W2C form, which is a corrected W2 form. So there is no specific paper stock that is required for W2C form. You can basically print it out on any paper and give it to the employees, or hand it to the employees. Right. Next slide. The most important thing about the year-end processing is the reconciliation. Okay, so we have these weapons in our armory. Okay, so these are the seeded reports that are available out of the box. Most of the customers are already using these reports for their either payroll reconciliation, or if you have already done your year-end before this, you might have used all of these reports in order to reconcile your data. So as we mentioned, you can start planning this and start running your Q4 files. Make sure that your Q4 files reconcile with these reports in the application. And there are a number of reasons why sometimes it does not reconcile. So we'll talk about that in the next section, which talks about issues and everything, and what we have seen so far in our experience. So these are the reports. So activity report, you run it maybe each payroll. After each payroll, you run this report, and it gives you a detail. It gives you details about the payments. It gives you details about the balances, employer liabilities, earnings, deductions, year-to-date details. So there are different modes in which you can run this particular report. The payroll active balances report is also one good report which gives you more details into the taxes for the employees. So if you are more interested in knowing what was the taxable income, the gross income, the subject reduced or subject reduced withholdable. So if you are interested in knowing these amounts, make sure that you run the active balances report. If something is incorrectly withheld or something is over withheld, there is this balance exception report that you can run towards the end of the year or towards the end of each quarter, which basically identifies any potentially incorrect tax amounts that were withheld or something that is over withheld. Apart from this, based on our experience with a lot of customers and how we help them in managing the year-end process, we have also built a repository of great custom reports, which will also help and supplement your needs when it comes to reconciliation towards the end of the year. So apart from the 3 reports that are available as seeded out-of-the-box reports, these custom reports can also be leveraged that EoSys has created to basically do a fast reconciliation of the data. Next slide, please. All right. So as I mentioned, based on the experience that we have under our belt for basically helping customers out across the end of the year hurdle, we have collated these frequently asked questions. These were the questions that were asked in our previous webinars or during the implementation process or during the year-end process. So some of these questions are really important, and you can basically navigate to the specific items that I have listed in the response. So one of them is where can I find Oracle white paper on year-end processing? So you can go to the document guide that that has the title End of the Year Processing Guide, and you can download that particular from the Oracle Knowledge. So this particular guide is a useful guide, and it lists down all the setup steps, as well as it provides you some bit of details on how to manage your year-end if you're doing it for the first time. Then which processes do I need to run to complete the year-end processing? So Oracle provides an excellent checklist called as the end of the year processing checklist. It is in that document ID that I have listed in the response. And this is a standard checklist of item which is used for the year-end processing. EoSys has over the years enhanced this particular checklist to make it more user-friendly and has included more steps which basically helps the customer complete this activity in time. Okay, so you can contact us for getting this particular checklist, and we'll be happy to share it with you. Now, next one is, will the third party generate W-2s for all the employees? So for this, you need to check your contract with your third party vendor. For most of our customers, and you can check if you are already subscribed to the tax services or to the W-2 services with that particular third party. EoSys has implemented projects both ways. We have implemented projects which has ADP as a third-party vendor, and we have also implemented projects wherein W2 is basically generated in-house, and it is mailed by the organization itself. Now, the next is if ADP is filing W2s for all employees. Sorry, could you go back? Oh, yeah. If ADP is filing W2s for all the employees, which processes do I need to run? So when ADP is in the scene, you just have to run one file, which is your third-party quarterly tax file for Q4. And that file itself will contain all your Q4 tax information, as well as the year-to-date information for the entire year. Okay, and the same file will be used by ADP to also generate the W2s for the employees. One more question on this that came up was, let's say I've already submitted a quarterly file and the deadline is already over. Now there are certain balance adjustments that need to be done. So how to go about it? So again, the answer to that is, if you are subscribed to ADP's tax filing, you need to make sure that you run the third party again in the amendment mode. after making all the changes to the balances of the employees and retransmit it to them one more time. Next slide. Similarly, we have certain other frequently asked questions. For example, if I'm printing W2s in-house, which processes do I need to run for generating these W2s out of the Oracle system? Because of COVID-19, I know there were a lot of presidential memorandums, and the basis of that, there was one signed which basically allows the employer to defer the social security tax withholding. In such a scenario, what needs to be done by the employer? How many times can you send Q4 file to ADP? We have already talked about this one in one of the slides. We can send it n number of times before sending one final one. After submitting files to ADP, where do the customer go and verify the W2s and other quarterly balancing reports in ADP? So if you are subscribed to ADP and if you transmit the file to ADP, where do you need to actually go to download the reconciliation reports or download the balancing report so that you can reconcile it with that? Then we have, if I want to print the W2s in-house for my staff, how do I do that, or what stationery do I need? We have covered this one in one of the slides. And how do I make sure that the W2 boxes are mapped appropriately? When I talked about EoSys repository of custom reports, we also supplement the customer's requirements with certain reports like these, which will help you in knowing that the W2 boxes are mapped correctly with the elements that are there in your implementation. So we provide such reports, and you can get in touch with us if you need to have that. Okay, next slide. Yeah, so some of the common issues. So I talked about things not reconciling back to the quarterly file. So why would that happen? So some of the common issues are listed over here. And as I said, these are some of the top issues. There is an exhaustive list of issues available on our side, but I have only listed a couple of some of them over here. So some of these are, I forgot to do some balance adjustments for certain taxes for a set of employees, and we have already transmitted the Q4 file. So what should we do next? How to resolve this particular situation? So the answer to this question basically depends on whether you have time or whether the deadline is yet to be reached or whether the deadline has already passed. Okay, so based on that, this particular issue could be addressed. Then one more issue that is very common is there is for California-based entities and organizations, there is something called as wage plan code, which ADP says that it is missing on the files when you send the quarterly file. So where is this particular information housed and how to resolve it? So this is again a common issue. Now, the next is W2 is generated for the employees. Let's say you are printing W2s for your employees in-house. They are already generated, but you are not able to see it in the document of records. As an employee using your self-service, you are not able to see it. So what are the steps that you need to do or that you need to take in order for these documents to be visible on the employee side? Then one more issue is for employees who are basically hired in the same entity in the current year, or basically if they are globally transferred from one entity to another entity, the third party file or the quarterly file only contains information of one of the entities and not the other one. So essentially it is inaccurate, as in it does not contain the information from the previous entity in which the employee was employed in. So in such situations, what are the steps or what are the processes that we need to do in the application to resolve this? There are certain reports as well available with EoSys that helps us identify these employees. And then there are certain steps or processes that you need to run in order to resolve these discrepancies. Okay, there are numerous other issues and numerous other questions that the customers had asked us. These were the most frequently asked questions. And I hope these were useful to you and in this particular presentation. Back to you, Audrey.
Great, thank you, Rohit. Just one last call for questions. If anyone needs any clarification on some of those FAQs, please feel free to share them within the chat with us. And if not, I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon. And just to remind you that if you're interested in our services, we can certainly help. Please feel free to reach out. We can absolutely create a tailored package to help you through the entire event. And I'm not seeing any other questions, so I think we'll give you a few minutes back in your day. Thank you very much.